What makes the achievement of emotional sobriety so difficult is the habits we have, the patterns we have in our behavior, the habitual ways that we've come to think about things. We have to really become aware of those things in order to challenge them, because the consciousness that has created a lot of the problems in our life cannot solve it, cannot change things. So what happens is the first step is waking up. What we're talking about now is how differentiation applies to emotional sobriety, how our level of differentiation shapes our consciousness, just like what Piaget discovered when he was working with children's cognitive development. At different ages, our cognition is strongly influenced by what is available, meaning what the brain can do at that time, at that state of the brain's maturity. And just like we have stages of cognitive development, we have stages of emotional development. And we're looking at now how our stage of emotional development influences the way we look at life, right? You've heard people say many times is we don't see reality as it is, we see reality as we are. See, we have that lens. You guys that have been in Herb's workshop, he talks about the lens we have. Well, that lens is grounded in your emotional maturity. That's what creates the lens that you're looking at your life through. So last time, and if you have not listened to that, I would encourage you to go back. And even if you have listened to it, go back and review how our consciousness is shaped by low differentiation. It's very important to become aware of those things. As I've said a lot, and you've heard Thom and Roger talk about it, Herb talk, we can't do anything about a problem until we become aware of what we're doing that's creating the problems. And that's a very important step. So this week, I was going to talk about what high differentiation looks like, but I realized that there would be a step missing. We need to talk about what our consciousness looks like as we are making a transition from low differentiation to higher differentiation. So tonight, we're going to talk about a transitional consciousness, the consciousness that's occurring as we are taking this journey of emotional sobriety, as we are attempting to raise our consciousness. And I think that, if you're as unrealistic as I am, you just want to start at the top of the mountain. You don't want to climb up the mountain. Well, I realized that doesn't work. Many times as I try to be at the top of the mountain, I somehow have to climb up. So we're now on the climb. That's what we're doing tonight. We're going to talk about what it's like as we're climbing up this mountain. And now we're making that transition from this low differentiation influence state of consciousness to a higher state of consciousness that's going to be informed by higher differentiation. I believe two important things have to take place in this transition. We have to develop what I like to call, or what I labeled earlier today, a healthy paranoia. You think, God, can paranoia be healthy? Well, we might just think of it as a healthy suspiciousness too. Now, what does it mean? Well, the healthy paranoia says, well, while there might be someone out to get me, that someone may be me. That's the healthy paranoia. There may be someone out to get me, but I don't think they're out there. They may be right here. So we need to start becoming suspicious of our consciousness the way it is. We now can start asking some questions. Is this really the way things are, or is this the way I am? Have I constructed a reality that is reinforcing the undifferentiated consciousness? And the answer to that, that's the suspicion. I think I might have. That question becomes very important. So in this transitional state, being suspicious of what we're experiencing becomes very important. But not only do we become suspicious of it, we also become curious and we start investigating. Hey, what's going on? If I start looking at this a little bit different, what might I see? So the first thing that we might see is that even though I may have taken something personally, let's say that Brian said to me, the suspicion could be, it may not be all about me. Maybe something's going on with Brian. Maybe I can start to think about what this is saying about him, not just about me. Now, I want to know what it says about me in terms that I've taken it personal. I want to be interested in that and to see that, my God, I am taking this personally. But I start to become suspicious that it's not all about me. We start to develop what I would call a healthy disillusionment with our consciousness. We start to suspect that this isn't served me as well as I might have thought that it served me in my life. That my operating system, if we use an analogy to computers, may be outdated here. And I might want to load up a new version of this operating system that might work a little better for me. So that feeling disillusioned, while some people might see that as a negative thing, actually in this transition state becomes very, very important. Because when I become disillusioned, I weaken the forces of that low differentiation. That healthy self-doubt begins to surface. You know, I might just have some of these things wrong in my life. We begin to explore, or at least to consider, our contribution to our suffering and to the difficulties we are experiencing in our life. Instead of externalizing and projecting all of this, we start to take some of these projections back and start to say, God, well, I wonder what this is saying about me, that not just what they're doing, but what is this saying about me that I'm reacting this way? So once again, the curiosity is being tweaked in us, right? We're stoking the flames of our curiosity in this transition. A glimmer of hope begins to occur. And hope says something like, I actually may be able to experience more emotional freedom than I ever imagined. I'll never forget when I met my sponsor, Thom, back in 1971. And I heard him talk about his life in a way that I had never experienced another person talk about themselves before. The kind of freedom he had, the freedom from bondage of self, was just so omnipresent in that room that night that I met him. It was very moving to me. And I couldn't have said it this way. He talked about that he had the same experience when he met Flowbird, his sponsor. But there was a part of me that was saying, if I could experience that, I could be okay in life. If I could get to that place that he was at, if I could have some semblance of what he has, I think I could make this life work. That's the glimmer of hope that starts to flicker in this transition from a state of low differentiation, moving towards that state of higher differentiation. On this journey, as we're making the transition, when we're disturbed, we do ask the question, there actually might be something off with me. It's not just what they're doing, but I may have a piece of it. And we may not be convinced that we have 100% of it, but maybe we think, maybe I got 10% now, maybe 20%. And maybe that as that transition continues, I think that percentage increases. We begin to doubt that our emotions are an infallible guide to the truth or reality. We start to appreciate the subjective nature of our reaction instead of treating it as though it's objective. We begin to believe, as faint as it may be, that things don't have to go my way for me to be all right, or to be happy, or to be okay. Things don't have to go my way. We begin to start to think that it's not things going my way, but it's how I'm coping with these things. See, we begin to see that the problem may not be what we think the problem is. The problem may be that I don't know how to cope with this. In this transition period, we begin to increase our awareness of being determined or controlled by emotional forces that are outside of our awareness. We start to realize that we are being lived by certain forces. And all along, this idea that I've been the one controlling my life may have been in a part of the illusion that I've been living, part of being asleep. As we make this transition, thinking and feeling become less fused. We have an awareness of the difference. How we catch this is when we say things, I feel that you are doing da 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 da, thinking that that's a feeling. Well, that's not. That's a conclusion. That's a thought. If I'm saying, I think you're doing this, that's more accurate. I feel things like I'm afraid. When I say I feel that you're doing this, as soon as I say I feel that, that's a thought. It's not a feeling. And I start to become aware of that difference, and I start to differentiate my language so that I become clearer about what I'm experiencing versus what I'm thinking. During this transition, I am less driven by having to be comfortable all the time. I'm less oriented to a life that's based on comfort. I begin to see the value in moving outside of my comfort zone into tolerating discomfort. I can start to see that ability to endure that and find meaning in it becomes an important shift in my consciousness. During this state of transition, I become much more aware of shoulds and musts in my life and how they show up in my language and supposed tos. Not that I necessarily have let them go at this point in time, but I'm beginning to see how much they dominate my consciousness. Where before I would say them habitually, I should, and didn't even realize I was talking about a should, I now recognize, oh my God, I just should it. We start to become aware of that. we also begin to question the authority of these ideas. Realizing that we've accepted many of them uncritically. You see, when you accept an idea uncritically like this, the idea is actually what we call an introjection. You've taken somebody else's idea of who you should be, how you should act, what you should do, and you incorporate that as though it becomes a value and standard to your behavior. But you haven't owned it yet. You're just playing a role, if you will. You're being the person you should be, but it's not integrated. So you start to question that authority. Is this really right for me? Do I really believe that this is right? That I'm not supposed to speak up for myself? That I need to erase myself and not stand up for myself in this thing? Is that how I want to live my life? So you start to question some of these uncritically accepted ideas. You begin to recover the locus of control of your behavior. Instead of being so based on your locus of control being so outside of yourself, other-based self-esteem is an example, others' validation, we hunger for that all the time. We start to bring that back and we start to validate ourselves. We start to now give ourselves an acceptance and approval where we were looking to others for it. Not 100% though. We're still caught in the transition, right? We got one leg in low differentiation, one leg moving towards higher differentiation. We begin to see other people as they are and not as sources of our validation or as resources to meet our needs. We start to develop a true respect for others. But it's not totally there yet, right? This is all still that transitional phase. It's a little muddy. On this way, the world is becoming a little less absolute. We're not having, our thinking is not as black and white. So we're becoming less rigid. We're finding that there's some flexibility, that if something happens, instead of getting mad about it, we say, okay, now what do I have to do to deal with this? So we're finding that our ability to cope is starting to increase, that we're gaining some true confidence in being able to cope with life on life's terms, instead of being so dependent on everything being the way we imagine it needs to be. We start to give up the need to win or to be right. That becomes less important than the connection and the relationship. We start to challenge our unenforceable rules. Do I really, really need this to be okay? Do I really need this? Do I need you to jump through this hoop for me to be loved? And instead of now putting all these rules on others, we start to look at what our rules are for ourselves. And we start to question our rules and start to say, is this rule a rule that really enhances my life or diminishes my life? Is this a rule that helps me connect to who I truly am and encourage other people to be who they are? Is it a rule that encourages freedom? Or is it a rule that is regulating other people and controlling them and diminishing who they are and diminishing who I am? Because it says I need things to be a certain way to be okay. So we start to differentiate between what rules we have are toxic and what rules are healthy. But we have to become aware that these unenforceable rules that are so unconsciously driven are unhealthy rules. We become less avoidant. We're willing to have some difficult conversations and to talk about things that we wouldn't necessarily talk about before. We're willing to start to face some of our own trauma. We're willing to look at some parts of us that we were unwilling to look at before. I've said before, as we're on this transition, the best in us can start to see the worst in us. We don't have to defend an image of a false self and think that we need to be that to be okay. We realize the ideas we had of what it means to be okay were very, very, very distorted by a lot of different forces. And finally, we entertain the idea that someone may not be coming. They may not. It's just likely that they may not show up, that I might have to figure this out. So that's the transition phase. Next week, we'll start talking about looks like as we move through that transition. What does it look like when our consciousness is much more now? The lens becomes grounded with this high differentiation. So let me invite my colleagues in. And if Herb is here tonight, I'd like him to join us as well. As usual, he has a standing appointment to join us. And Thom and Roger, I believe, are here tonight.
Yeah, gang's all here. Let me get everybody on the screen here for you.
Okay.
The gang's all here.
Hey, Thom.
Hey, you may remember that I have, on my wall at my office, I have my sign that says I discovered a new mental disorder, and it's called apathetic paranoia. You talked about the paranoia before. Apathetic paranoia is, where'd everybody go?
We're all right here with you, Thom.
Oh, something. God, everything went crazy on my laptop.
Quit projecting, Thom. Come on, we're with you.
I tell you what,
it's not us.
Neil Diamond showed up on my in front of all of you. It's like,
oh my God, like, you dropped some good acid back in those days, man. Good flashback.
God, it was good. But anyway, I just want to define apathetic paranoia. It's a deep suspicion that someone's out to get you, but you don't really give a shit. It's like, and I think you have to, there's always those rule outs. I think you just have to rule out aging with that too, by the way. I think that's kind of where we all kind of move towards. So I just want to make I'm just going to jump in here just real quick, because when you start talking about the transition, I loved it. It's very quick reference to the last part of my day. I was working with a client of mine who has really hit a tough spot and shut down. She's shut down completely. And so we kind of just sat on today is a FaceTime session, and she's in another state, and just sat with each other, or I sat with her while she basically refused to answer any questions, and that's okay. We did that, but we hung out together long enough to where I asked her at the end of the session, would she please, between now and next session, just consider the possibility of letting me in, because I really thought I could help her, and I thought that we could do this together. And so I made the connection to what you're saying, Alan, is that the transition period is a time where our awareness, we become aware of how comfortable we are in the familiar, and it's like, no matter how negative it is, we're still comfortable in it. So this is the place where we make, just like I was asking this young woman to consider making a deal with me that she'll let me try to help. Is we make a deal. We start the process of making some deals with ourselves. Is I'm going to take some chances. I'm going to take some risk. I begin to have that reasonable doubt and one of the biggest things, and I was actually reading in my Tony DeMello book, Awareness, this morning about his emphasis on how we really have to come clear that we have to start by saying we don't really want to change. We don't really want to wake up. It's too damn scary. So, but we need to be able to acknowledge that. And because we're really asking ourselves at that point to walk into some really scary territory. Yeah. And I love that. So that's what I want to say.
I would I would love to hear Herb. Have you unmute yourself, Herb, and share your thoughts about moving from a less differentiated state to a more differentiated state? There we go. Oops.
You muted.
You muted again.
It's the monks from the silent.
He goes back to that monk thing.
I mean,
Am I unmuted now?
You're unmuted.
You are unmuted now.
That's
Hi,
interesting.
Herb.
Oh, I see what
Welcome.
it says. It says exactly the opposite of what I'm doing. Good, I got it.
Got it.
Yeah, I'm Herb. Thank you so much for inviting me to the party. Alan, the description from your psychological vocabulary and experience is totally parallel, different words, but the dynamic is totally parallel to the experience I had. And now I try to communicate with other people about dealing with column 3 and column 4 in the resentment inventory. Column 3 reveals the lenses through which I'm looking. I don't know that my lenses are distorted because they're the lenses I'm looking through and have been habituated to look through. Until I begin to be asked some questions that begin to reveal that there's a warp in the lens. And we talk in our emotional sobriety about beliefs that are the shoulds, that are the story, that all is a delusion and needs to be reframed. And Chuck C's book name is wonderful. I need a new pair of glasses. I need to have my lenses ground so that I see reality as it is. And then that fourth column brings me into with several questions that I approach with that open mind and open heart that Thom talked about. Willing to be confronted with questions that I've never asked myself or been asked or been willing to be honest about. And that is the source of the thoughts and the feelings and especially the actions that I took. And it was totally embarrassing. I'm not a very special, unique and gifted person. I'm not a Renaissance man. I'm a Neanderthal. And it was like, oh my God, I'm so embarrassed in my own presence. But I saw the motives under everything was all about me. And you had the charm and the smile on your face when you revealed to me my own narcissism. It was like, oh my God, these 9 characteristics, and you made the offhand comment, there are 9 characteristics. The only thing missing in the DSM is your picture. Yeah, thank you very much. And I paid you good money for this. Right.
And then you wrote me a check. Do you remember that?
Then I paid good money for being embarrassed. That's right. That's right. And you know, Rohr talks about having the mask that is our shield.
Yeah.
That story, which is our mask, that delusion, which is our mask, having my metaphor is having sulfuric acid poured on it so that the mask deteriorates. It's a sense of suffering because I'm losing something I've been habituated to, but then it's the only thing that allows the true self to reveal itself. So, I mean, I could obviously go on for a while, but I find out that I think the scary thing that people talk about is the recognition they do not control. They do not control outside of me. I do not control inside of me. I have some influence, very little, but I do have some influence, but I have no control. And that's a pretty scary spot when, in fact, you've had the delusion all your life that if only you know more or do more, or in some fashion, there's a formula that I can be free and or happy. Anyway, yeah. So that's my experience happened, and it was a progressive experience over time, having it revealed progressively over time, that dimmer switch going up and the darkness dissipating and the light being revealed. The good news is there's more light. The bad news is there's more light.
I love that. I've always loved when you said that. And look, what you said before is so true. Is our suffering, we have a special relationship with it, and we're afraid to give it up at times, like you said, because it's what we've known, it's familiar to us, and all of that. I'll never forget, in a session, somebody turned to Walt, and he was doing this therapy session, and says, God, this is something that I just really struggle with giving up. It's like I'm losing a part of myself.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget his answer to that, Herb. He looked at her and said, that'd be a good part for you to lose.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Instead of getting in all this other stuff, and says, it's time to surrender that. It's time to let that go and try on something new.
Yeah.
And that's the thing I've seen in this whole thing, is we are moving towards a much more creative and flexible consciousness.
Well, because we're accepting reality as it is, as it manifests. We're not trying to control it. We are trying to accept it and roll with it.
Yes.
Without tipping the canoe.
Yeah, that's right. All right, Raj.
Thank you, Herb and Thom. Alan, I like this transitional Dr. Berger here. I do. Really good thought about including this talk between the other two. Right? You and I both have our tendencies, from my perspective, to get a little dogmatic at times and to get a little rigid at times. And even the way you talk about this, I just love the feeling of, flexibility and flow with it, man. And for me, it's a lot of different things. It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, depending on how anxious I become. So I was really glad, Thom and Herb, for you guys to give voice, because that's the one piece I would give more importance to. There's a lot of anxiety that goes with this process for most of us, because we have this idea, or a whole bunch of ideas and images, I think for most of us, certainly for me. I just realized idealized self starts with idea, right? I mean, we have these ideas of who we need to be that we developed in our family, as you often talked about, to get the acceptance, to get the approval, to get the love that we hope for. It's a scary business. That's why Brené Brown and others talk about the importance of vulnerability so much, and a willingness to pull our own covers, because that is the pathway to freedom. It's what you admired so much, is another way to put it, I think, when Thom shared back in 1971. Because as you just said, Herb, it wasn't about presenting an image. It was about trying to align himself with truth.
Right.
Now, my own perspective is I always need to be skeptical about just how good of a handle I have on truth. No matter how much progress I see that I've made, for all I know, I'll be looking back a year later, or 6 months later, or 2 years later, and see I was even more deluded when I thought I was seeing so clearly than I was 6 months before that. So this, to me, is where humility comes in as a big piece of it. Courage, certainly. And one of the biggest factors for me, besides fear of, letting go of that idealized self and continuing to use it for cover and to get what I want from other people, right? To manipulate or control. Shame or embarrassment. You talked about embarrassment. It's painful stuff, right? And that my self-judgments get in the way a lot of my ability to align myself more with what's true.
Yeah.
But it is in those moments when I have it, it's a wonderfully freeing feeling to go like, I don't have to be invested in that image. Not in this situation, at least with this person. It's a wonderfully freeing feeling. So what other thought did I have? Don't have it. So that's it. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate you bringing in, because the one thing I put a note down here and I didn't mention it, but you reminded me of it, is this relationship to our anxiety.
Yeah.
And in that transition phase, it's not that necessarily that the anxiety is gone, but we now become aware of it in a different way, right? It's so funny. I mean, if you would have asked me when I first started my journey, are you an anxious person? I would have said, no, I'm a Marine.
Yeah, right.
Right? I don't feel that. My God, I realize how anxious I am at times. It's not all the time. There's times I'm not anxious, but I became acutely aware of these sensations I was having that before I had them, but I wouldn't have labeled them anxiety. And they were anxiety. And so there's like this, it's like when you had your cataracts removed, Herb, how
Yes.
clearly, I'll never forget when you shared that with me.
Yeah.
It gives me goosebumps because I said, oh my God, Herb, that's what's happening to us with emotional sobriety.
That's
We're
right.
undergoing cataract surgery.
That's
We're
exactly.
having this film lifted
Yes.
and these things that we couldn't see before or that were colored. I mean, I remember you said, my God, the air quality got so much better. And it wasn't because of the emissions control and stuff like that. It was because that film got removed.
Right.
And that's what happens with we become aware of some of these things that we were unaware of. It's not necessarily that we know what to do with them yet, but now that awareness starts to build.
Right.
I hear a lot of people criticize the 12 steps that they're old-fashioned. I can understand that criticism. They were written back in 1935. Some people that are agnostic have difficulty with the word God used in the steps. For me, I look at the process that's involved. The forces that the 12 steps generate are so powerful that I think they're ageless. There's this interesting phenomena that happens when you work the steps. They create a charge and then a discharge. The first step, we're powerless. Our life has become unmanageable. It creates this charge. We're in big trouble and we don't know what to do. And then step 2 comes along and it says we have hope. That charge, that existential crisis that we have is resolved. What's happening here is parallel to life. We charge ourselves when we breathe in. When we exhale, we discharge. That's the rhythm of life. And the way I love to think about the 12 steps, it's helping us get connected to the rhythm of life so we can learn how to show up in a good way.